Hey nerdies, it's Kathleen M's here, and I decided to start a new series thanks to Lena, who made an amazing video tribute to me. Check out her channel, it's in the description. Tell her to make more amazing videos. She requested that I share some of the nerdy objects that are in my room, like my comic books, my video games, and my posters. And I thought this would be a good thing to do before I move to South Korea in a month, because unfortunately I'm gonna have to put a lot of these items in storage. I've learned from experience when trying to bring all of my items that I'm moving with on a plane that the cost can really add up. Now, as you see, this is quite a modest collection compared to a hardcore comic reader. A lot of my comic books are in digital form. I've been starting to read a lot of comics on my Kindle because, like I said, I'm living a very nomadic lifestyle. For these next couple of years, I want to live in Korea, hopefully Japan, so I'm going to be moving around a lot until I settle down. So it's wise for me to stick to digital copies because those are much more compact. However, these comic books have more of a collector value for me. For every comic book, I have a story. They all have personal value to me. Now, I don't have any of Deadpool in this collection. There's many of my favorite characters that are missing from this collection, and if you want me to talk more about those in another video, I would love to, though I'm not sure how I could go through my Kindle and share all of those comics. That might be a little more complex, but right now we're gonna focus on the material things. The first thing on my stack is Attack on Titan. I honestly haven't read these yet because I don't want to get hooked. I know that I might just buy a shit ton of these when I go to Japan. That's probably the smarter thing to do, because if I start reading these, I'm gonna want to buy everything, and I do not have enough space or time to do that right now. The next thing on my stack is Saga. This is my favorite comic, and as you see, this is the only thing I've consistently bought issues of, because many times I've gone into a comic long after it started, but I started reading this as soon as it started because I was already a fan of Brian K. Vaughan's work. He also read Y the Last Man, and I'll get to Y the Last Man in a second because I have all of those as well. But this is one of the only comics I will consistently show up every time a new issue comes out because it is that damn good. Saga tells the story of this couple that come from two different worlds, and their species absolutely hate each other. They're at war with each other, and yet they manage to have a child, and they're trying to raise this child while war is going on around them, and while bounty hunters are trying to kill them both and steal their child and do all sorts of weird research on their child, most likely. This is a very dark world, and it's very explicit, so I wouldn't recommend this to some of my younger viewers. It reminds me of Game of Thrones in that you will get close to a character right before that character is killed, and then characters that you thought were villains you will end up respecting because you'll see parts of their personalities that makes them lovable. Also, the artwork of Fiona Staples is absolutely incredible. You will never see creatures quite like the creatures that she imagines. You'll never see worlds and environments that are so bizarre and yet beautiful. The next item on my stack is Romeo and Juliet. Now, this doesn't have the strongest writing. I mean, it's based on Romeo and Juliet very roughly, but it's a cyberpunk retelling of Romeo and Juliet. And as someone who's read Romeo and Juliet over a dozen times, I'm always a little bit critical of any story that tries to retell it, but the reason why I picked this up is the visuals. The visuals are incredibly stunning. It's a cyberpunk retelling of Romeo and Juliet, and although it does have a little bit of gushy romance, it's mostly war, just as the original Romeo and Juliet story was, and that's why this makes a perfect subject for a cyberpunk story. It seems a little bit unlikely, but it was a good read, and I mostly just picked it up because this looked so interesting, and I love the artwork of this, and it's a nice thing just to kind of put on my shelf. People pick it up and look at it and be like, oh, cool, that's some cool artwork. Yep. And now for my pathetically small Marvel collection. As you can tell, I'm not a huge Marvel person. I just started to recently get into Marvel when I just dove into Deadpool, and I love Deadpool comics mostly because he makes fun of the Marvel characters and the confusing lore, and that's mainly why it's been hard for me to get into Marvel, because the lore is so freaking confusing. But Deadpool is a breath of fresh air in the Marvel universe, and although I don't have any paper copies of Deadpool, I think that it is worth talking about these 3 volumes that I have in my hands right now. So, The Astonishing X-Men. This is a cool grab because I got this one of the first times I walked into a comic book store. About 5 or 6 years ago, maybe sooner than that, but it feels like it was 5 years ago. I still had red hair back then. I walked into Famous Faces and Funnies, the local comic book shop, which I would totally recommend if you live in this area. And I talked to the owner and I said, hey, I know nothing of X-Men, but I want to dive into X-Men. And he recommended The Astonishing X-Men, but he sat down and he told me the entire backstory of X-Men up until this point, which was so helpful. And I think that just shows that there are amazing people in the comic community that are willing to greet newcomers with open arms, and that's why I felt so at home at that comic book store, why I felt that I could dive into the comic community even as a casual reader and as a beginner. And I think that's why a lot of people are intimidated, mostly by Marvel comics, but also just superhero comics in general, and that's why I hold on to this comic. So next I have Marvel 1602. This is a really interesting read, and it was a gift from a friend. It puts many of the Marvel characters that you love, like the X-Men, in a medieval setting, and it fits. I thought it would be a weird clash, but it makes a lot of sense and it fits, and it was a very, very good read. I would definitely recommend this to anyone who is interested in Marvel or the X-Men at all. It's a very good read. So my last Marvel comic is Cable, and I actually picked this up because I fell in love with Cable in Cable and Deadpool, which is one of my favorite Deadpool comics and one of my favorite comics of all time. And the reason I like Cable is a little bit of backstory. So he is the son of Cyclops, and he has this techno-organic virus that is killing him, that's turning his biology into technology. That's why he has this, you know, cybernetic looking arm right there. And so Cyclops, he sends him to the future hoping that it will cure him, that they'll have some type of cure in the future for what his son has. Unfortunately, he doesn't find a cure, but is able to maintain the virus using his technesis and telepathy abilities. I think I said that right? Whatever. It's very, very hot in here. I can't use my fan because if I use my fan, it'll ruin the audio. So it's a little hard to concentrate, and I'm probably sweating like a pig. Sorry about that. But back to Cable. So the reason why I like Cable is because he is insanely, insanely powerful. In Cable and Deadpool, his telepathy is so strong that he can read the thoughts of everyone on the planet. He has this almost godlike power that frightens the X-Men, and the X-Men are constantly at odds with him. Cable does these very morally ambiguous things in order to prevent the future that he grew up in from happening, because Cable, if I didn't explain that strongly enough, he grew up in the future and then came back as a grown man hoping that he could change the future from happening, because the future that he grew up in was filled with war and filled with violence. And if I'm getting any of these details wrong, just let me know in the comment section, because I'm a newcomer to Cable. But, so in one way, Cable's biggest flaw is that he's just too goddamn powerful. And he's an interesting, conflicted character, and that's why I picked this up, because I wanted to know more about the Cable that I learned to love in Cable and Deadpool. Now for my Batman collection. I would love to take this whole stack, but I don't think I can. Maybe I can. Oh, Batman. collection. Okay. For my Batman collection, I'm mostly just going to go through some of them and maybe give a description of some of my favorites because I have quite a few here and I don't want this video to be 30 minutes long, although I suspect that it probably will be 30 minutes long. So, Batman, the Man Who Laughs, about the Joker. Batman vs. Bane, this was a gift from my father, I think for Christmas, I think that was. Yep. Batman Arkham Asylum, this was a gift from Brian, 3 Topics reviewer. I read it, I loved it. The artwork of this is absolutely insane, and this is such a bizarre, different Batman comic. I don't think I've ever read a comic quite like this. It's very strange and bizarre, and I think that this is definitely one of those comics that you need to pick up and you need to read. It is one of my favorites. Batman Earth One. Batman Hush. This is a really cool Batman versus Superman type of comic. Batman, of course, kicks Superman's ass, as always, because Batman is superior. Yep, I'm gonna say that even though I know that's a controversial statement. Yes, Batman's superior. Suck it. Batman Year One. It goes into Batman's origin story, the origin story that we all know and have heard millions of times, but it's a great read. Next is Batman the New 52. This is The Court of the Owls. Really, really cool story. It has a different villain, a new villain called the Court of the Owls, and this villain challenges Batman in ways I've never quite seen him challenged in a comic before, and that's why I think this is worth picking up, because I don't know, that's one of the reasons why I love Batman comics, is that there's so much imagery, so many common themes that are used, so much symbolism that is used in the story. And yes, symbolism is used in every superhero story. That's why superheroes all have a symbol. But Batman plays with these very deep themes that I enjoy analyzing, and that's why I enjoy this. I mean, this is the kind of comic that you could pick up, read several times over, and find all of these unique, gorgeous details in the art and the writing, and that's why it is one of my favorites. Speaking of deeply symbolic and amazing stories, Batman the Killing Joke. This I did a character analysis of on the Joker in one of my videos. I think it was like 2 years ago, so definitely check that video out if you want to hear my analysis of this comic book. This goes into Joker's origin story, or his complex origin story, because the Joker sees his origin story as more of a game of multiple choice than a straight yes or no answer. It's quite interesting how they play with the theme of madness, and it is quite dark. Definitely not for the faint of heart. Batman The Long Halloween. My dad just got me this. I have not read it yet, and by the time that you see this video, I will already have read it. So I'm pretty sure I'm gonna like it. Next is some Harley, the New 52, and Suicide Squad. This is so goddamn good. My dad actually bought me this. He brought it over one day as a gift, and I read the first volume, and I had to go and buy the rest of the volumes because I was so addicted after that. Suicide Squad tells the story of a bunch of DC villains that are hired by the government, or should I say forced by the government, to do suicidal chores that no superhero would want to do. Very morally ambiguous things that only villains would want to do. But one of the things I really like about this is Harley Quinn's role, and seeing how she is without the Joker, you realize that she is an unstoppable force on her own, that she is just as dangerous as the Joker and very crazy and emotionally and manipulative, and that she should be taken seriously as a villain on her own. I like what they did with Harley Quinn and her origin story. They kind of did a rehab of her origin story, which, you know, it's a little different, but I like what they did, and it's definitely worth picking up. Just pick up the first volume and you will be addicted if you haven't already. So yeah. Wow, it took me forever just to get through that, and I have all of this. Oops. So let's move on to my video game comics. I don't have a bunch of them. I think many times video game comics are usually a cash grab. They know that nerds will pick them up and read them, and it doesn't really matter what their content is. I think that's often the case with video game comics, but I have picked up a few and enjoyed the ones that I picked up. I have a series of Mass Effect comics. Really good reads because they explain some of the story in between the games, and I think this one in particular was really important because through this comic you learn. My next video game comic book is The Last of Us: American Dreams. It is about Ellie and Riley, and this is another comic book that goes into some backstory that I think is important for their characters, and I'm glad that I read this before I did my Ellie character analysis because you do learn quite a few things about her character when you read this comic. Next is Lady Mechanica. It's a cool steampunk comic with a female lead, and I saw it at the comic book store one day, picked it up before I realized that it got discontinued and that there will be no more issues of this comic, which is kind of sad because I wanted to know where the story was going, and I thought the art was really cool, but I'll never get to know where the story was gonna go because it never saw the light of day, which is very, very sad. Why The Last Man? No surprise, I like this comic. I talk about it in every comic book video I've ever done because this comic, it's one of the best things I've ever read, honestly. It tells the story of a man who is the last man on Earth. He survives an epidemic that simultaneously kills all the men on the planet, and he ends up being this damsel in distress. He's like one of the least likely men to be the last man on Earth. He doesn't enjoy that role. He doesn't appreciate that role. He's a very introverted, weak person that doesn't want the attention that that role gives him. And these very strong female characters come to his aid and they protect him. And I really recommend this because it's an interesting inversion of gender roles, of sexuality roles, and the writing by Brian K. Vaughan is absolutely incredible and unlike anything I've ever read. The next group is Fables. Now, if you've seen my The Wolf Among Us Let's Play, you know that I love Fables, and you're probably a little bit familiar with the story. So Fables tells the story of many fairy tale creatures that are stranded in New York, and it's an interesting modern day spin on some of the fairy tale creatures that we know and love, but also the plot is really interesting. It takes some twists and turns that I never expected. One of the charming things about Fables is that these characters face an enemy that seems undefeatable. This series has managed to be interesting for so many years. I think it started in 2004 or something like that. It's been around for more than a decade, and yet it's still interesting, and I think it will continue to be interesting. It's very sad that the series is going to come to an end, but I enjoyed the ride as it lasts, and I hope that the writer will be working on some other projects in the future. This is my Walking Dead collection. It's not complete yet, but this is so incredible. And if you know what The Walking Dead is. If you're watching this, you know what The Walking Dead is. Everyone knows what The Walking Dead is. And if you haven't read this and you watch the show, start reading this. You can buy compendiums. That's the easier way to get started because there are a lot of issues to catch up on, but you can catch up by buying these bigger volumes, these collections of the issues, and you will not spoil anything for yourself by watching the show because they intentionally go in a different direction in the show. They have different characters that aren't in the comics, and they explore things in the show that they do not explore in the comics. I'm obviously out of breath because I have not made a video this long in a while, and lifting these comics in this heat is getting to me. Oh my god, it's so fucking hot here. Oh, There's not much more I can say about The Walking Dead other than if you do try to binge on these, I would recommend against it. Please do not binge on these because you will be super depressed. These are very, very dark comics. It never gets better for these characters. It only ever gets worse. Things only ever get worse. And if things start to get better, you realize that that's what's gonna happen before shit hits the fan. Like, this is not an uplifting, happy story. It's a post-apocalyptic story about people's lives who go to hell. Like, it just, everything goes to hell. People die, it's horrific, and the things they show in this comic, they will never be able to show fully on the TV show because it is just awful. And that's why I would recommend that you read this story in increments, because I felt so trashed after reading the first compendium in one sitting, which was like 60 issues or something like that. It's a great story, but do not binge read it. So yeah. So that was my very modest comic book collection. I hope you enjoyed this show and tell video. I want to hear in the comment section, what are your top 5 or 10 comic books? And hopefully some that you would recommend to me. I want to hear in the comment section, like, what should I add to this collection? I may have already read some of the books that you're going to recommend, but I want to hear from you. What are some comics that you're interested in? And if you're not a comic book fan and want to join the club, join the club. Let me know in the comment section, what has kept you from joining the comic book world? Join us, and we are here with open arms. Not all of us are asshole comic hipsters that say that we're better than everyone else. Like, it is a great community. Join us, join in the nerdiness, the comic nerdiness, and I should go. Our first glance of Harley Quinn. In this scene, I think this is right after Harley Quinn fucking loses it. This is after the Joker breaks her down mentally. I'm gonna get to that a little more.